Welcome to the Vision Driven Marriage Podcast. If you're struggling in your marriage, or maybe you're wondering if it's even salvageable, before you give up or before you let things get too hard, let us come alongside you and help you solidify your marriage. We offer biblical encouragement and insight to help you strengthen your marriage. Welcome to a Fifth Friday bonus episode of the Vision Driven Marriage Podcast. We are wrapping up a month-long topic of recovering from infidelity. And my guest today is the exclamation point on that conversation. Dr. Deborah Miller joins us today, and she is the author of More Than Sorry, 5 Steps to Deepen Your Apology After You Have Committed Infidelity. Welcome, Dr. Deb. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast.
Thank you, Leslie. I'm excited to be here.
Great. So what prompted you to write about this subject?
Well, I am a therapist and working in private practice, and I worked a lot with couples who were trying to restore, recover, repair after an affair, and it was getting a bit redundant. The couples would come in, and the person that was wounded, I call them, the person that was cheated on, really needed to vent, scream, cry, ask lots of questions, and needed support. And I'm not taking away from that, but then I would look over at the person, the violator, the sinner, the one that had the transgression, who cheated. And that person typically would be head down, mumbling, when asked why, say, I don't know. And they just really never participated in the repair enough. And I felt like it was so one-sided, and that there was really making the repair pretty futile. And
go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that I would do some research, like what is out there for the person who cheated. And honestly, most of the supporting self-help and books is for the person violated, that and the chat rooms and all those things are really for that person who, was completely in shock and completely baffled by what all that happened and had tons of questions.
I think we see that a lot, don't we, in the counseling room, where the focus is on the wounded and not on the wounder, right? On the one who committed the transgression. And that is not God's plan. I believe that God works to restore a relationship. He will work in both of the spouse's hearts in order to repair that relationship.
And so that's the motivation. How do you get that person who is filled with hopefully guilt, wanting to make change, wanting to be vulnerable, open, risky in terms of showing courage and looking at their own defense mechanisms and their own violation. And so there's some pitch, you almost have to sell it to them. Like, this is really going to help you, and, honestly, the people that probably buy my book is probably bought by the person that was cheated on, because it's such amazing infrastructure that we all have on our defense mechanisms. We all want to protect our ego and not truly look in the mirror and be completely honest. And so often, most of the time, people won't be willing to work on their transgressions unless they're caught,
Right. Right. And that's why, and you can elaborate more on this, but that's why it's so hard for the person who has committed that transgression to talk about it. It's because there's not a safety net in that relationship, a vulnerability, a place that they can be vulnerable, right? So how do you facilitate that within the couples that you work with?
Well, that is the challenge. And so you have to really, I really find I have to work individually with the person that cheated, because they are gonna not be as open, not be as willing to self-analyze and to tell their story about what happened. Because of course there were probably some dynamics in the relationship, but you can't work on that first. First, you have to repair this transgression. First, you have to repair the infidelity. And so the first question to the person is, why? Why do you want to do this work? And
yes. Why do you want to do this work, as opposed to why did you cheat? which was,
Yes.
that's kind of a condemning sentence, but bringing them toward their spouse with, why do you want to do this work? I think that is an amazing turn, an amazing point of view there to emphasize in that. And so it's not always once a cheater, always a cheater. That's not always true, is it?
No, but it takes it's kind of a spiritual energy, a curiosity about yourself, a desire to get to an intimate place with in friendships and romantic relationships. And so all of that means you have to take a really hard look at yourself. And be willing to grow from mistakes. We all make mistakes. We're all sinners. We all have things we're not so proud of. This is a biggie, though. This is a biggie. And you've really hurt typically at least one person and maybe more people that may not even be aware that you have it.
Right. And sometimes it's coming from a place of hurt that
Mhm.
that person might not have ever even addressed, or even know that's kind of working subconsciously right there, right?
Yeah.
And so when a person starts making this repair, what are the components of a sincere apology?
Yeah, so my book takes you through it's like a journaling process and it is always a process. And you can't
Mhm.
sit down and read it in one sitting. You have to commit to, I don't know, a month or so of really doing your self-analysis. I call it navel gazing. And it sounds a
Okay.
little it sounds a little narcissistic, but it's important that you really go, what are they
Introspection, right?
thinking? What are they doing? Because most people have not even told their story.
Yeah.
They typically just, if you cheat, you're not going to go hang out and tell what happened to somebody. It's usually a secret. And that is the definition of an affair. It's a secret relationship.
Hmm.
If the two of you did not agree upon a third party, then it's an affair.
Yeah.
And so it could be the internet, it could be online porn, it could be just online chatting with someone that's
Hmm.
not sexual,
Like an
but
emotional affair, right?
it's a relationship that the other person had no clue was happening, because when there's a third party in your relationship, it changes the dynamics of you and your significant other.
Yes, yeah, it does. We had done a interview earlier this month with Brenna and Garrett, and I've talked so much about that interview this month because it was so profound in how the Lord restored their relationship. They were both having an affair, unbeknownst to either of them. And so when they started to unpack that, it was, very difficult for them, but the Lord restored their relationship in some beautiful ways, just beautiful ways. And so, but her book is also written to the one who committed the transgression. And that's why I was so interested also in your book, because it's like I said, we don't see that a lot in the counseling world, or even in the church world. We're more geared towards sitting with whom we would call the victim,
Yes.
than the one who is the perpetrator. And I think that's human nature, but it's certainly not God's plan. I don't think we need to be more aware of and being able to minister to the couple as a whole than one or the other, right?
Yeah, it's a balancing act, and knowing that
Hmm.
you're really trying to treat their relationship, not necessarily them individually. How do they
Right.
balance each other? Which
Right.
brings me to the first step of a really sincere apology, because we've all been conditioned to say I'm sorry.
Hmm.
And it's fine, but it's really not very impactful or powerful, especially if it's not really owned. So the first step is empathy. Do
Hmm.
you, as a violator, truly get how much you hurt the person that you cheated on? How much do you really understand where they're coming from? And that is a skill to communicate empathy, and it takes practice.
Yes, it takes practice. Changing that point of view to the other person's, being able to see it from that other person's point of view is such a good skill. And
Mhm.
it's hard, especially as common society becomes and has become more self-focused. There's not a lot of looking at things from other people's point of view.
Yeah, we're all got a little guardedness and defensiveness. And so, especially in this case, if I'm coming at you and angry that you hurt me, that you cheated on me, you violated my trust. It's really hard for me to go, wow, you're really angry. No, my first reaction is to say, yes, but.
Yeah,
Yes,
yes, but right.
no, you didn't pay any attention to me, or yes, but it didn't mean that much. It wasn't that big a deal. I mean, whatever our yes, but is,
Yeah.
it's human nature. And
Yes.
so the skill, the knowledge to learn how to go, okay, I hear you, and here's what I hear. Don't just say, I get it. You have to say the words back. It's in our counseling world, it's called reframe or
Reflective
validation,
listening.
reflective, validation, all those words that should be part of our common language. It's a very important skill.
Yes.
And it is an internal need to figure out how to hold back your self-protective mechanisms that are just going to kick in. And so, it's really hard to look in the mirror and get it.
But when you bring in an ounce of humility, and that's, that's a biblical, that's something that we're called to as Christians, is to be humble in our relationships, even when we're the ones that have caused the hurt, to be humble in that relationship. That's where that starts. When you come in with a humility, then you're able to at least more clearly, or a little more clearly, maybe see the other person's point of view. And so it is a definite skill to have and practice, isn't it?
Yes.
So
Yeah.
what's step number 2?
Step number 2 is to look inward, to do the navel gazing. And there's a pretty long chapter, honestly, because you want to look at your defense mechanisms. You want to look at your attachment styles. You want to look at your personality styles. You want to look at how you cope, how you manage stress, how you communicate. Because the reality is, again, if we don't think we're going to get caught, we just can somehow do this bizarre, like, it's not a big deal. No one knows. No one's going to hurt.
Justifying it, right?
Justifying. And that's so huge. So that's step 2, is really, really take some time to look inward and make guesses, because the big question the wounded is going to ask is why. And guess what? That answer, it's not a black, white answer. It's very complicated. And my answer is going to evolve with the more awareness I have of myself.
Yes. And
so, day 1, why'd you cheat on me? I don't know. I was bored. Day 365, a year later, why'd you cheat on me? Wow, I realized I was really self-absorbed. I was, not taking care of myself. I wasn't looking and honoring our marriage, our relationship. And then 5 years later, it may even be another answer, but that is also the point. This isn't a one and done deal.
Right.
You're not going to just done apologize. It's going to keep coming up. It's going to be a kind of a part of your relationship that you have to sadly accept. This is part of our identity as a couple. And that means you have to have this courage, the humility, and the skill to address it when it comes up again. Imagine sitting there watching a TV show and the characters are having some affair, and it just makes you flood with memories. These bad memories get stuck in our heads. And so when you want to be able to say, wow, I can tell you're thinking about the affair I had 5 years ago. And the other person saying, yeah, it still hurts. And, not that you're going to rehash all the specifics, but you're going to say, I'm so sorry. Again, I'm so sorry that I hurt you.
Just being able to deal with that current trigger, because that's what it is. It's a trigger. You've been triggered by something in the current moment because of something that has happened in the past, being able to deal with that current and know that that's coming. Like, it's not be able to expect it because it's going to be coming.
Yes. I know. Because I'm not saying this works with everybody, because some people just aren't ready. And I used some case studies in my book, and there's one couple that didn't make it because he was just totally annoyed. Like, why are we still talking about this? Why are we bringing it up again? I told you I'm sorry. I told you I won't do it again. And he wouldn't explore it and talk about it. And they weren't feeling safe with each other.
Right. I can see where that would make the wife, I'm assuming the wife, make the one spouse feel like they weren't connected in that relationship because their feelings were not being acknowledged or, not being honored in that kind of way.
Yeah. And so step 3 is saying it out loud. Again, the secrecy of affairs is that we stuff it and we don't ever tell the story to anybody. We don't process it out loud, and we don't find someone to be our accountability partner. And it can't be your spouse often or your significant other because they're too wounded.
Yeah.
So you need to find someone, whether it be a therapist, a minister, a good friend, who can listen without judgment, but also hold you accountable, with what you're going to do. But you have to say it out loud. It makes it harder to stuff it. If you don't tell anybody, you can do this again, this brain thing that says, oh, well, minimize, it's going to be no big deal.
Yeah. And then, right. And then minimize it, excuse it, make it something that it's not, And so yeah, when you say it out loud, you have to own it. And then you have to own how you feel about it,
Right, right. Because you know what? People are going to have a lot of cases. Did get attached to their affair partner, and they did have some positive experiences about it. Are you going to share that with your significant other? Not really, because that's just digging in the nail a little too deep. But it is important to step back and go, why was I able to be more open, more vulnerable, more fun, more spontaneous with this affair partner? How can I find that part of me in all my relationships? Esther Perel is a pretty famous sex therapist or marriage counselor in our field. And she said that sometimes an affair is not an attempt to have a new relationship, but to have a different relationship with yourself. So that's the soul searching. Was I searching?
But being able to open up and speak those things with your spouse to say, this is what I need in our relationship, and how can we work together to get that accomplished?
Yeah.
And I think, and that's that's kind of like the benefit of being introspective, is that you're then aware and can voice what you need and move towards your spouse to get those needs met.
The last 2 steps, set your restitution goals. How am I going to be different? How am I going to be more honest? How am I going to be more focused on repairing my relationship? How am I going to be different with my children, with my community, with my church, whatever it is? Just set some goals. And then the last step is I suggest writing a letter of apology. And it's going to be more than I'm sorry. Because, when you say I'm sorry, I hurt you, you need to expound on that. How did you hurt me? What are you aware of? And what have you learned about yourself? And what are you committed to do differently?
So that vulnerability and that transparency, that's where the true connection in the relationship can grow. And without that transparency, because that vulnerability is not there, it makes it harder to connect with your spouse as you're trying to apologize and say you're sorry, and harder for your spouse to connect with you because they don't feel seen or heard in that relationship. So I can see where that's a very powerful step.
And guess what? You may not be forgiven.
Yeah.
Your spouse may not be ready. Your child may not feel good enough to trust enough to stay with you.
It takes time, doesn't it?
And you have to, you have to accept that. Just because you're doing all this work to self-improve or to own up and take responsibility for your behavior doesn't mean the other person can let go.
Right. And I think accepting it and still working on it is a little different than accepting it and saying it's never going to change, because forgiveness does take time. And there's a lot of things to work through when you have been so wounded. That person has to unpack all of those issues too. Just like, you're encouraging the person who has committed that adultery to be reflective and introspective. And the wounded spouse also has to say, is this so deep, and why is it hurting so deep, and can I forgive, and how do I forgive, and unpacking all of that stuff too. So I think bringing into the whole process a sense of, this is going to take a long time, but I'm in it for the long haul. I think that is really, really important. And like you said, bringing in some accountability or some support, because it's not shameful to get a counseling and to get help. at this, at this time, because it's hard. It's a really hard time.
Yeah, everything, all the advice I'm giving to the person that committed infidelity, I'm also giving to the person that's wounded. I mean, they
Yes.
need to do their own self-analysis. They need to do their own acceptance and get help and talk about it with people and process all that's happened. But I do have a couple pages of tips for the wounded, basically saying you're in charge. You get to decide what you're going to let go of and how you're going to do, and you have to figure out how to have the patience to watch and listen. And it's hard because initially when an affair happens, there's so many logistical questions. What hotel did you go to? How many where'd you eat dinner? How many months? How many times? How many, and yes, you need to know, but then there's a point where you don't need to know.
Right.
You have to figure out how to just let go of not really knowing,
Right.
and to stay in the connection with your significant other.
But I
And that's
think that would be easier to do as the trust is being rebuilt. Like as the trust is being rebuilt and some of the wounds have healed, it's easier to make that decision to let go of some of the other things a little easier. So that's kind of part of the process as you go. And I know like Brenna and Garrett, they said it took over a year when as they were, processing all of the things, but they committed to the things that they committed to were things that would solidify their relationship. They committed to open communication. They committed to complete transparency and doing what it would take, like what the other person needed in order to repair that relationship. So they were both completely committed to repairing their relationship. And God did an amazing work in their marriage, in their relationship. And so
right.
I know God restores, but sometimes the process is a lot longer than what we think it is going to be, isn't it?
Yeah, again, with our humanness, we want to erase pain. We want to
Yes.
erase emotional pain as quick as we can.
Mhm.
But in their case, they both had to do some individual repair and make amends. But you said something too about law transparency, and that is you have to let go of your own privacy for a while.
Mhm.
The other person needs to see all your text messages, your emails, your phone messages. And, so again, you have to be committed to accepting the ramifications of your infidelity and committed to knowing the process it's going to take to get back to loving and liking each other again.
Yeah. Yeah. And I would say that even having a transparency like pre-affair is something that would not leave your relationship open to the risk of an affair to start with. I mean, Doug and I practice that open that open transparency. He has access to my emails. I have access to his computer and his phone. He knows where I'm at. I know where he's at. We just have that open transparency with each other. More so, obviously, more so than anybody else in our lives. And I think practicing that kind of level of transparency really can ward off the risk of an affair to start with.
Yeah, that's kind of a really good practice, especially to counsel new couples,
Yeah.
that this isn't, yeah, you got to have a level of trust. And trust is kind of waxes and wanes. I mean, that's, it's not like I trust you, it's going to go up and down, especially recovering from an affair.
Oh,
So
absolutely.
it's going to take a long time, if ever, to get to 100%. You hope to
Right.
get to 80%.
Right.
It's
See,
okay.
I think sometimes we talk about trust uh not in its fullest, or kind of from a wrong point of view, or not wrong, but a different point of view. I think trust should always be talked about as a consequence of being trustworthy, because that puts the responsibility then where it belongs, and that's on the person to be trustworthy. Like if the spouse is being trustworthy, trust is going to happen.
Mhm.
It's a consequence
Yeah,
of
it
being
makes sense.
trustworthy. And so often like it's the experience that I've had in the counseling office is that I'll have a spouse say, well, my spouse doesn't trust me. It's their fault because they don't trust me. Well, are you being trustworthy?
Mm.
Trust will happen if you're being trustworthy. And sometimes I shake my head and
Reflecting on some clients in the past who, over and over again, the one spouse would deny any wrongful doings, but yet had their own phone account and their own separate email account. And then, of course, in today's world, you can pretty much dig into most of that stuff. And of course, the other spouse did and discovered a lot of
yeah,
wrongdoing.
it's hard, isn't it? If you take responsibility for being trustworthy, then your spouse is going to trust you. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just a simple fact. And so, Dr. Deb, it has been amazing to have you on the podcast today. And please tell us where we can find your book, and I will certainly link that in the show notes for you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's on Amazon, and
Where we all find our books at,
we
right?
all find our books. But yeah, my website is drdebmiller.com, www.drdebmiller.com. And there's a link to the book on that. It might be easier to find it that way.
Very good. And I will put those links in the show notes for sure. One last piece of advice for us, for the couple that would be facing this process. What would you tell them?
My advice is, to really hold on to the commitment and belief that who you were in the past is not who you have to be in the future.
Yes, brilliant. I think that is a good word. It's not always once a cheater, always a cheater. That God can restore that relationship to something that is glorious and in his nature is what I'm trying to say. So
Yeah, I agree.
well, thanks, Dr. Deb. It's been amazing to have you. And until next time.
Okay, thank you.